The morning sun, usually a welcome beacon over the meticulously manicured lawns of the Grandview estates, felt less like a greeting and more like a spotlight aimed at a pending scene of absurdity. Detective Sergeant Michael Mike Rourke, 42, a man whose professional life was defined by the cold, hard logic of police procedure and the unequivocal authority of the badge he'd earned over 2 decades, stood by his kitchen island, idly scrolling through the local news feed while sipping a coffee that was far too hot for a Friday morning. He was the chief of police for the neighboring municipality of Westmont, a position that commanded respect, not just from his subordinates, but from the county-wide network of law enforcement. His private life, however, was currently being dictated by the petty tyranny of the Grandview Homeowners Association, or HOA, a cabal of busybodies whose power stemmed solely from their interpretation of neighborhood covenants and a monthly fee. Mike had been in an ongoing, simmering dispute with the HOA board, specifically their self-appointed enforcement chair, a retired accountant named Mrs. Henderson, over the height of his rosebush hedges, a disagreement Mike found beneath contempt but was forced to acknowledge due to the constant barrage of official-looking, yet ultimately meaningless, violation notices. Just yesterday, he'd received a final warning, delivered by a solemn, clipboard-wielding youth hired by the HOA, threatening escalating fines and, ridiculously, further legal action, including potential removal of the owner. He'd tossed the notice into the recycling bin, a gesture of defiance against the paper trail they seemed to relish creating. It was precisely as he set his mug down, a mug that, ironically, read "World's Best Boss," a gift from his precinct, that the first sign of trouble arrived. A loud, aggressive pounding on his solid oak front door echoed through the house, a sound far too insistent and forceful for a simple delivery or neighborly visit. Mike's police instincts immediately kicked in. He moved silently to the front window, peeling back the edge of the curtain just enough to peer out. His jaw tightened. 2 men stood on his porch. They were clad in what were clearly low-grade, poorly fitted uniforms, dark blue shirts, cheap tactical pants, and ill-fitting vests that looked more costume than protective gear. They each had the obligatory, mirrored sunglasses resting on the bridge of their noses, and, most damningly, they wore patches Mike had never seen on any legitimate law enforcement agency, a bizarre crest featuring a stylized gazebo and the words Grandview Community Compliance Unit. One of the men, a doughy fellow with a nervous twitch, was holding what appeared to be a standard-issue restraint kit, zip ties, not regulation cuffs. The other, the one who had been pounding, was taller and more aggressively postured, trying to look imposing but managing only to look uncomfortable. Both of them, Mike noted instantly, were armed, but their weapons were obviously airsoft replicas, the kind you might find at a specialty toy store, painted black for effect. The entire tableau was a painfully amateur charade. Mike didn't need a search warrant or a detailed briefing to understand the situation. The HOA, likely Mrs. Henderson, having exhausted their supply of passive-aggressive notes, had decided to escalate their threat of further legal action to a new, breathtaking level of delusion. They hadn't called the real police, they had rented police. They were attempting a citizen's arrest, or perhaps a mock arrest for intimidation, using hired security guards, or perhaps just 2 desperate actors, masquerading as law enforcement to enforce the covenant on his shrubbery. The sheer, unadulterated gall of the move made a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face, replacing the earlier morning irritation. They had no jurisdiction, no authority, and had just committed impersonating an officer, a felony offense, right on his front porch. They had picked the absolute worst possible person in the entire county to try the stunt on. He took another moment to compose himself. He quickly grabbed his own standard-issue duty weapon, a fully loaded Glock 17, and his official, leather-cased gold badge, clipping the latter onto his belt. He debated calling 911 but decided against it. This was his problem, on his property, and he had the expertise to handle it. He approached the door, his movements fluid and professional. The pounding intensified, accompanied by the taller man yelling, "Police! Open up! We have a warrant for your arrest, Mr. Rourke." The absurdity of a warrant issued by a homeowners association was almost enough to make him laugh out loud. He unlocked the door, not throwing it open in a theatrical burst, but pulling it inward slowly, deliberately. He stood framed in the doorway, 6 feet of solid, uniformed authority, even though he was currently wearing a casual polo shirt and slacks. The two fake officers froze mid-pounding, clearly startled that he hadn't cowered or fled. The taller one, momentarily flustered, tried to regain his composure and barked, "You are under arrest by the authority of the Grandview Community Compliance Unit. You must come with us immediately." He even gestured clumsily with the plastic gun. Mike simply stared at them, his gaze cold, professional, and utterly devoid of amusement. He didn't raise his voice, his tone was the one he used to de-escalate a tense situation in the field, calm but carrying the absolute weight of true authority. "Gentlemen," he said, drawing the word out, "I suggest you drop your weapons and your props right now." Slowly. On the ground. He paused, letting the implication sink in. "I am Detective Sergeant Michael Rourke, Chief of Police for the City of Westmont. You are currently trespassing, impersonating a police officer, and committing felony menace with a fake weapon. Your game is over." He slowly reached to his belt and flashed the gold badge, its official gleam catching the morning sun, a stark contrast to their cheap patches. The taller man's face instantly drained of color, his aggressive posture collapsing as if his spine had been removed. The nervous, doughy man on his right, who had only managed a small squeak of fear, dropped the zip ties and raised his hands, shaking visibly. The encounter had just taken a sharp and terrifying turn for the Grandview Community Compliance Unit, and Mike Rourke was ready to write the report. The immediate, profound silence that fell after Mike's revelation was far more deafening than the earlier aggressive pounding. The taller, former aggressor, who had moments ago been attempting to execute a farcical felony arrest, seemed to physically shrink, his bravado evaporating like morning mist under a heat lamp. His eyes, wide with sudden, sickening realization, darted from Mike's official badge to the service weapon holstered at his hip, and then up to Mike's face, which now wore an expression of cold, professional disapproval. The cheap plastic weapon in the man's hand suddenly seemed like the most incriminating, idiotic object in the world. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. The second man, the doughy, nervous one, was already halfway through a panicked surrender, his hands trembling near his ears, muttering faint, almost inaudible apologies. "I said," Mike repeated, his voice maintaining its level, dangerous calm, "drop the props. Now. Unless you want the situation to escalate into an active threat scenario." The phrase active threat scenario was standard police terminology, designed to legally justify a heightened response, and its use, even when directed at two pathetic figures, carried immense weight. It worked. The taller man's hands opened instantly, and the airsoft rifle clattered onto the meticulously maintained paving stones of Mike's porch with a hollow, cheap sound. The noise seemed to emphasize the utter fakery of the entire operation. The nervous man's zip ties lay forgotten on the ground. Mike didn't move from the threshold, maintaining the tactical advantage of the doorway. He pulled his phone from his back pocket, keeping his eyes locked on the two men. "I'm calling this in," he announced, dialing the number for the Westmont dispatch, though he knew the dispatcher would likely be baffled receiving a call from him under these circumstances. He kept the phone on speaker. "Westmont Dispatch, this is Chief Rourke. I need an immediate response unit, make it 2 cars at my home address in Grandview Estates. We have 2 individuals here engaged in felony impersonation of law enforcement and trespass. They were attempting a false arrest, armed with replica weapons. I have the scene contained. Please advise Grandview security to stay clear." The dispatcher, momentarily stunned into silence by the identity of the caller and the unusual location, eventually responded, her voice tight with confusion, "Understood, Chief Rourke. Responding units en route immediately. ETA 5 minutes." The sound of the dispatch confirmation was the final blow to the 2 fake officers. They exchanged a look of utter terror, a look that clearly communicated they had grievously misunderstood the nature of their hired job. They had signed up for a simple intimidation gig. They were now facing felony charges and a trip to a real booking station, courtesy of a sitting chief of police. "You two," Mike said, his attention returning fully to them, "step off the porch, turn around, and place your hands flat against the column of the entryway. Do not speak unless spoken to." The men scrambled to comply, their movements clumsy and uncoordinated. Mike stepped out onto the porch fully, assessing the immediate area. He spotted a beat-up sedan parked haphazardly down the street, almost certainly their getaway car, but no sign of any HOA management. He had a strong suspicion, however, about who was responsible. The patrol cars arrived quickly, sirens blessedly silent as they neared the exclusive neighborhood. 2 marked Westmont cruisers pulled up, followed quickly by an unmarked command vehicle carrying Mike's deputy chief, Sarah Jensen, who had likely heard the dispatch call and knew the gravity of the situation. Jensen stepped out, her professional composure momentarily faltering as she saw her chief of police standing over 2 men in ridiculous, fake uniforms. Mike nodded a terse greeting to his deputy. "Sarah. Appreciate the fast response. These 2 were hired by the Grandview HOA specifically, I suspect, Mrs. Henderson, to stage a false arrest over a landscaping dispute. They are in possession of replica firearms, and their patches identify them as the Grandview Community Compliance Unit. They're being detained for impersonation of an officer, felony trespass, and attempted kidnapping, potentially." He handed the situation over with the economy of words only a seasoned professional could use. Deputy Chief Jensen took charge immediately, directing the patrol officers to cuff the 2 men with real, regulation handcuffs, a sound that carried a far more satisfying click than any zip tie. The humiliation of the 2 actors was complete as they were read their Miranda rights, their faces twisted in disbelief that their attempt to enforce a Rosebush regulation had ended in a very real arrest. As the officers secured the 2 suspects and began processing the scene, Jensen turned to Mike, a faint, professional smirk touching the corner of her mouth. "A landscaping dispute, Chief. They tried to arrest the chief of police over a shrub." Mike sighed, running a hand over his jaw. "The audacity is what's truly astonishing, Sarah. They banked on me being just another homeowner who would panic. They didn't just cross the line, they apparently tried to use a garden hose to cross the Grand Canyon. I want these 2 processed by the book. No preferential treatment. And Sarah, I want a full investigation launched into the hiring and instruction of these 2 men. I want to know exactly who in the HOA authorized the creation of the Community Compliance Unit and, more importantly, who approved the attempt to impersonate police and carry fake weapons onto my property. This has stopped being a simple HOA dispute and become a criminal conspiracy investigation." He looked down the street toward Mrs. Henderson's pristine, overly decorative home. Mrs. Henderson is going to learn that the consequences for impersonating an officer are far more severe than any fine they could have levied against my Hedges. The chief of police was no longer just a homeowner, he was the primary victim, and he was about to use every legal channel available to dismantle the source of the absurd attack. The aftermath of the botched arrest was not a sudden burst of activity, but a slow, grinding process of official procedure set against the backdrop of quiet, privileged suburban life. As the two miserable, recently deputized actors were loaded into the back of a real police cruiser, their flimsy community compliance unit uniforms looking increasingly pathetic, Mike felt a shift in his own demeanor. The initial shock and professional assessment had given way to a focused, cold determination. This was no longer merely a neighborhood nuisance, it was a matter of public integrity and criminal law, initiated against him personally by individuals who believed their homeowners' regulations superseded actual state statutes. Deputy Chief Jensen had already called the county prosecutor's office to brief them on the details. A sitting chief of police as the victim of a false arrest attempt by individuals impersonating law enforcement. The prosecutor, Mike knew, would take this case with extreme seriousness, understanding the inherent threat to the legal order. Meanwhile, Mike, still standing on his porch, watched as a patrol officer carefully bagged the replica weapons and the ridiculous patches as evidence. He retrieved his phone again, this time ignoring the flood of confused texts from colleagues who had heard the unusual dispatch call, and instead searched for the official contact information for the Grandview Estates Homeowners Association board president. He found the number for Mr. David Thompson, a man Mike had only met once at a forgettable community meet and greet, a soft-spoken individual who usually seemed more concerned with the quality of the annual neighborhood barbecue than with punitive enforcement. Mike dialed the number. Thompson answered on the third ring, his voice cheerful. "David Thompson, how can I help you?" Mike's response was ice cold. "Mr. Thompson, this is Chief Michael Rourke. I'm calling you in my official capacity regarding a very serious incident that just occurred at my residence." He allowed a beat of silence to emphasize the gravity. "Your community compliance unit just attempted to stage a felony arrest of a sitting chief of police at his private residence, using replica weapons and impersonating law enforcement officers. We currently have 2 individuals in custody, facing multiple felony charges, including impersonation of an officer, attempted false imprisonment, and trespass." The cheerfulness instantly evaporated. Thompson stammered, "Chief Rourke, what are you talking about? Compliance unit? We don't." Mrs. Henderson was handling some escalated enforcement actions, but an arrest that's impossible. His denial was clearly rooted in genuine shock, suggesting he might have been kept out of the loop regarding the extreme measures taken by his enforcement chair. "It is not only possible, Mr. Thompson, it is documented fact, currently being processed by my department," Mike countered, maintaining a steady, authoritative tone. "I need full disclosure from you. I need to know exactly which board members authorized the creation of this compliance unit, who approved the purchase or rental of the fake uniforms and weapons, and who instructed those men to come here with the intent to detain me. This is no longer a civil dispute over a rose bush, this is a criminal investigation, and your cooperation will determine if the entire HOA board is viewed as co-conspirators in this scheme." Thompson's voice was now thin with panic. I had no idea about any arrests or weapons." Mrs. Henderson said she was hiring private security to deliver a final warning and document non-compliance. She assured us she had a foolproof plan to resolve the Rourke matter. "Chief, I am telling you, I will cooperate fully. I will check the minutes, the emails, everything. Please, tell me what you need." Mike knew he had him. Thompson was the weak link, the one who would crack to save himself and the rest of the board from potential liability. I need the name of the company they were hired from, all correspondence regarding their instruction, and a full accounting of all funds spent on this so-called compliance unit. I want everything related to the scheme on my desk by 5 p.m. today. Fail to comply, and I will be at your office with a search warrant for all HOA electronic records, and I promise you, that will not be pleasant. He disconnected the call, satisfied that the foundation for a much larger legal action had been set. As Deputy Chief Jensen finished up with the patrol officers and the evidence, she approached Mike. I got the names of the two losers, Chief. They're part-time security guards, hired through a non-bonded, fly-by-night agency registered across the county line. Looks like they were promised double their usual rate for a non-confrontational intimidation job. They were clear that a lady named Carol told them to make the homeowner think they were being arrested. Carol Henderson, Mike confirmed, watching one of the cruisers pull away with his two amateur antagonists. She used the HOA's money and authority to stage a crime on my property. That's malfeasance, fraud, and a significant abuse of power. I want the investigation to proceed quietly but aggressively. I want to build a case that not only charges those two actors but targets every single person on that HOA board who signed off on the funds or the concept of their own private, fake police force. They need to understand the difference between writing a fine and committing a felony. He ran a weary hand through his hair. The confrontation was over, but the reckoning was just beginning, and Mike Rourke, the homeowner, was now Chief Rourke, prosecutor of the HOA.